I guess to speak a little bit about my background, I'm from the US and I studied political science as an undergraduate. I was very active in the anti-war movement here in the United States. So for me, I started actually as an activist, someone who wanted to learn, everything about the modern Middle East, also culture in the Middle East and North Africa because I was very frightened and despaired by American foreign policy in the region. And I was hoping that my career would somehow contribute to a more responsible relationship, not only with the Middle East, but other parts of the world. So I started as an activist, but I very quickly learned about the power of media and particularly the role it played in the lead up to the war in Iraq. Our media was very much silenced after 9/11. Critical voices, investigative journalists were attacked in this country, and it led to a climate where the right questions were not asked before we made decisions of war and peace, which was eventually the decision to go to Iraq. So for me, journalism and the failures of journalism played such a pivotal role in adventurism and what I think most people now would agree was not only a mistake but a betrayal and an enormous violation of American military power as it was used in Iraq. So that's what kind of drew me to journalism, the power and the power and opportunity, but also responsibility that comes with media. And that's how I got to some great advice to get to the Middle East early on, to practice Arabic early on, to meet activists very early on. So I really had great contacts while I was just an undergraduate student. And so then by luck of the politics of the time, I returned to the Middle East after my undergraduate degree. I got a fellowship to study in Israel. Mm-hmm. And I was studying in Israel, working in the West Bank. And then I got phone calls from some friends in Egypt who I'd known from my study abroad there, who said there's going to be a revolution. Get down to Egypt. There's protests on January 25th. I didn't think in a million years that the protests would result in a revolution. Egypt was an incredibly repressive environment, very similar to how it is now. But I thought, okay, whatever, if I miss this, I'll never forgive myself. So I went down and was there for the beginning of the 18 days that ousted the dictator Hosni Mubarak. And from there I moved to Cairo. I quit graduate school, moved to Cairo, and started taking the kind of rotation around the Middle East that many of my colleagues took, which was working in Libya, Bahrain, and then of course Syria, which has been my main focus for 4 years now. So that's kind of how my career started. And as you heard, I mentioned Bahrain. So I was reporting. Bahrain was one of the first places that I reported in. It's a place that is very close to my heart, particularly the protest movement there. And so our return last month was as professional and as journalistically motivated as it was, a story that's very personal, and I have good contacts and friends really who are working against enormous repression inside Bahrain. So unfortunately, obviously, we didn't anticipate the kind of arrest or the charges that we faced. We did anticipate arrest, I guess, the Bahrain incident was a little nightmare. Of course, it was resolved very quickly, and our sources are safe. We're safe. So we are, pleased and grateful for that. Right now, we were released. Our case is a bit unusual, and that's what was alarming about it. We made my team and I work in hostile environments throughout the Middle East. I've worked, primarily in Syria for the past 4 years. So we're very trained to be working and operating in these kinds of environments. And our risk calculation was that we would be deported if we were inside Bahrain for a certain number of days. So we anticipated that. Usually the process has been, for the past couple of years, almost a routine. Most of the journalists that have come in that are foreign journalists enter on a tourist visa undercover, meet with the sources that they would otherwise not be able to meet with because the government would be tracking you and you would be endangering those sources. And then the government eventually finds you after a few days. It's quite a small island. It takes 40 minutes to drive across. And then you're searched and deported. But usually they let you keep your gear, and they're quite professional about it. Our case was different. We were there on the 5-year anniversary of one of the most controversial days in modern Bahraini history. We were in the most controversial part of the entire island in a neighborhood that really has been turned into a battlefield every day for the past 5 years between the police and the people. So the stakes were heightened, and when we were arrested, the police even thought that we were going to be deported in a matter of hours. We were very professional with them. They were professional with us, and we were cooperative. And they even I said something like, "Oh, I have a phone call at midnight. I'm going to need my phone back." And they said, "Oh yeah, you'll be out of here by then." And then our case was handed over to the Ministry of Interior, and they asked for our sources. And our case went from our charges went from entering on a tourist visa instead of a media visa to charges of terrorism, unlawful protest, rioting, of course, ridiculous charges that have very severe sentences. And that's when everything really turned. So we were, of course, quite frightened by that. Now the way that the case was resolved is that it wasn't resolved. The U.S. Embassy intervened on our behalf. There was a great outpouring and mobilization by press freedom groups and human rights defenders. We really think that mobilized our release, and they released us without closing our case. So we're still under investigation in Bahrain. And because of that, they kept all of our gear as material evidence. They said it would be resolved in 3 days. Then we heard later that it would be resolved in 3 months. So right now they have about $20,000 worth of gear. Actually, no, like $25,000 worth of gear, which is, of course, devastating. We did have insurance on that gear, but just an example of, the challenges freelance journalists face, even when you're with a production company. Insurance is saying, well, because you might get that gear back 3 months from now, we can't cover it in the meantime. For directors of photography, for camera ops, the men on my team, that's pretty devastating financially because it affects their ability to work in the short term. So that is kind of one of the biggest challenges of reporting in these environments, and really that insurance and production companies that you work with aren't even, they don't even have the capacity to fully protect you the way staffers did, were protected in previous generations of journalists.
Anna, I was just wondering what the implication would be now, because you're saying that since you pivot in so many areas in the Middle East, and the fact that you had this unfortunate incident in Bahrain, now does it mean that if you had to do a story, you would not be able to go back because you've been deported, and then because this is all up in the air at the moment?
We're worried about traveling to the Gulf right now because of extradition and because of the relations that Bahrain has with the rest of the Sunni Gulf. So we won't be traveling to the Gulf until our case is closed. We're a little bit worried about Egypt as well because Egypt receives so many contributions from Saudi particularly. So in the meantime, we won't be traveling to the Gulf, for our security and as advised by the State Department. But the other places that I work, like Turkey, Palestine, and Syria, are in a state that we don't feel there is any risk of extradition. So I am able to continue working, and those are where our other stories are. So we're going to be able to continue. But of course, this kind of looming threat in the Gulf is something that we hope is urgently resolved, because of course, our work may take us there in the future.
Of course, we hope so too. Sorry to hear about the incident.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.